Hey, I'm Doug McAllister, and this is Journey's podcast, Stories I Didn't Tell Last Sunday. Thanks for joining me today. I want to tell you a story about my dad. This is Father's Day week that we're recording this. You may be watching it much later, but I want to tell a story to you about my dad. And before I get to that, though, I do want to just celebrate what a great day at Journey we had yesterday. It was Father's Day Sunday at the church, and we did something unique that we kind of invented a couple years ago. We had a celebration, and this year we called it the parking lot party, and we set up some tents out in the parking lot, and we had a bunch of us guys brought our grills, and we fried catfish, and we grilled hot wings and barbecue wings, and thick, juicy bacon. I think we counted, we did over 1,000 servings of food yesterday, and man, I tried a little bit of each one. The wings were especially good. I like barbecue wings. The bacon was amazing. We just had a great time, and we just celebrated dads. We wanted dads to know when they got out of their car Sunday morning at Journey that we honor fatherhood, we celebrate masculinity, and we affirm men's role in the community, in the home, and in the church. So that's why we did it, was just to affirm men and celebrate fatherhood, and just pat those guys on the back who do most of the working and the living and the dying in this world. And, you know, they are just special to us. All of our dads are special. And then once you got inside the lobby at the church, in the cafe, we had a keg of Abita root beer. If you're not from this area, you probably have heard of the brand name Abita. Well, Abita's right down the interstate from Slidell in Abita Springs. They have their own flavor of root beer. So we got a keg of Abita root beer on tap and set it up in the cafe, and gave out frozen mugs to the dads as they walked in the door so they could get their own, mug of root beer, ice cold right from the tap. And then in the service itself, we had 3 giveaways for some Yeti thermoses and some other stuff that we gave to a few lucky dads in a drawing. It was just a fun day, man. And then we had a special message. Pastor Ken preached last Sunday, so I could be out in the parking lot. And the message was focused directly on men and fathers in particular, and how much of an impact that dads make in our lives. There may be no other person on the planet that has affected your life like your father. And that goes whether or not you had a great experience with your dad, or if your dad was absent. Fathers leave an indelible mark on their children. And, I think that's reflected in culture. All the great epic movies and books and stories and songs that involve relationships between fathers and their children is legendary. Star Wars, Luke, I am your father. That's the core of the entire 9 part sequels of the Star Wars saga, and I think they're making 3 more now. It all revolves around that one relationship of the brokenness between a father and his son and his daughter. I think that is just a capture, or that captures the essence of how powerful fathers are in our lives. I was very fortunate. I had an incredible dad. I haven't heard his voice in 16 years. And, sometimes you think that life's going to last forever, and you just forget. Life happened, and you take it for granted. My dad passed away in June of 2006, and I haven't heard his voice since 16 years. But the truth is, I hear his voice every day. It's kind of crazy that when I'm when I'm doing something around the house or I'm trying to fix something, I hear my dad say, I wouldn't do it like that. You're going to break that. Or that's, you got the tool on the wrong way. My dad taught me how to fish. He taught me how to hunt. He taught me how to love my wife and taught me how to love my children, sometimes without even saying a word, just watching how he loved my mom. And watching him, how he raised his kids. He didn't really give me a list of things to do or not to do. It was just watching the example of his life. And, my dad was an incredible dude. I'm going to go out to the cemetery this week for Father's Day just to pay my respect. I know he's not there. I know it's just his body, but I don't know. It's just something healing about, that moment, and something I think special because Dad leaves such a mark on you, forever, and I think that's probably, true in every one of our lives. And when I was 12 years old, we lived out in the country. We were country people to the core, So I turned 12 October of 1974. And my dad came home from work that day. He worked every day at the same job as long as I knew him. He'd leave at 5:30 every morning, or he'd leave, maybe it's 4:30. Every morning he would leave at the same time. He'd come home at the same time every day. Well, this day was a little unique. He came home and we would eat supper at 4:30. That's what we call it in the country. We don't call it dinner. We called it supper. So we'd eat supper every day at 4:30 precisely. When my dad got home from work, my mom had everything ready. Well, that day he brought in a long box, and he said, I got you a present for your birthday. And I opened it up, and it was a 410 shotgun. And that's, not your normal gift you give a 12-year-old. Here's a shotgun. I don't know if people still do that a lot or not, but it was special because my dad took me hunting with him all the time, but I never had a gun until I turned 12. And then he took me out and taught me how to shoot it and how to load it and how to clean it and how to store it. He taught me all the safety rules of guns, and I still have that gun. I'm 58 now, 59, nearly. So I've had that gun now for 47 years. I haven't fired it since I was 18 years old, but every time I've moved, I brought that gun with me. It represents, a coming of age moment in my life where my dad, trusted me with a gun and then taught me how to use it. When I was the same summer, we went camping. There's this camping area that's overgrown now, but at that time we called it Logtown, Mississippi. It was out near the Pearl River, and it was an old town that had been wiped away by one of the hurricanes. I think it was Betsy, I believe, leveled that city or that little town and never recovered. But it became sort of like a camping, mecca for people to go to and camp. Right on the banks of the Pearl. So we were out there at Logtown, and we were camping, and my dad and my older brother and we had a tent and a campfire and all of the stuff you do when you're camping. And we're sitting around the fire at night. We'd been fishing all day. My dad had a little radio. Apparently it was battery operated, and he had it on a country music station. And man, this is one of those moments that just is seared in my soul. That's a story I wanted to tell you today. So there we are late at night on the banks of the Pearl River, me and my dad and my brother sitting out, and my dad's talking, and we're just enjoying the quiet. And the radio, a song comes on that my dad apparently liked, so he turned it up, and it was B.J. Thomas singing, "Hey, won't you play another Somebody Done Somebody Wrong" song, which may be the longest title in the history of the world for a song. But I remember hearing BJ singing the song and listening in the night air. And it captured a moment in my life between me and my dad, and even though it was a love song about a love gone wrong and so forth, it didn't really apply to dads. But the song and the melody and the sound and the feeling and the emotions, every time I hear that song, man, I am right back on the Pearl River, sitting next to my pop in the middle of the dark woods, listening to this song and feeling loved and happy and feeling anxious for the future and wanting to know what life's about, and I think that happens to all of us, that those moments in time kind of become defining moments in our, manhood. So the next morning when the sun came up, I asked my dad if I could drive the boat, and he had a 14-foot aluminum flat with a little Evinrude on the back, and it was a 3-passenger boat. It was real tiny. It was so small that the engine, you would steer it with, the shaft from the actual outboard motor. We didn't have a steering wheel. You would just guide it with and the throttle end of the motor. So he said, yeah, I think you're old enough. So my dad got in, and I cranked up the boat and revved up the engine and took off. And he let me drive up and down the Pearl River and stood on the bank and waved at me as I went by. Now, had my mom known that, she probably would have not been happy about it. Moms don't want their 12-year-old boys, cruising up and down the Pearl River alone. But my dad knew it was time that I'll take a step, and become a man, and those moments are just special, and they go by way too quick. And we treasure them forever. And we're grateful. And maybe that's why God refers to himself as our Father in heaven. Because God's much more than a father. We know that. God is the omnipotent creator of the universe. He's the Almighty. He's from everlasting to everlasting. He's more than words can describe. But yet, when he wanted to introduce himself to us, he introduced himself to us as a father. Of all the roles, of all the titles he could have used to introduce himself, king, powerful ruler, almighty, and he is all those things. But when he wanted us to know him, he said, I'll be your father. Man, how amazing is that God wants to be our Father. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. C.S. Lewis had a really neat quote about that. He said, and this is a paraphrase, you can look it up for the exact, but he said something like this: I think humans don't want a father in heaven as much as they would like a grandfather in heaven, because grandfathers are one generation removed, and they are loving and kind and visiting. But it's the fathers who do the hard work of discipline and provision and protection and all the things that a child needs to grow up and become an adult, come from the hands of the father, from your dad. And I don't know who you call dad in your life. I hope you were fortunate and had a dad. We learned yesterday in the message that a great majority of children in America grow up in a different house from their dad. And I think that may be the pandemic that we're ignoring. That's the great plague on America. Of all the other battles that we're fighting, the one that we're losing and hardly ever addressing is the battle of fathers not raising their kids and kids growing up without a dad. But a child will find a dad to attach to, a father to follow. I think it's just born in us. It's innate in our lives. We need that male influence. We need the masculine influence in our lives. We need a leader. We need a discipliner. We need somebody to call us out. My dad could spot a lie from a mile away. I can never lie to my dad because he could see through it, man, like an old screen door. He could just see right through it, and he would call me out, because he loved me enough just to not let me get away with, with petty lies or being something that he knew that I wasn't, or getting involved in something he knew that I should not be involved in. That's how dads are, and I just think that's missing in our culture right now. We're growing a fatherless generation, and we haven't seen the destruction yet of the fruit of a generation who grew up without a dad. I don't know where you are today with your earthly dad. Chances are you didn't have a good relationship with your earthly dad, or maybe your stepdad raised you, or an adopted dad raised you, or maybe your grandpa raised you. But whoever filled the role of dad in your life, I want you to remember that the Bible teaches us that honoring father and mother is the first commandment that has a promise attached to it. In fact, Jesus even mentioned that, how important it was to honor your father. And honoring your father has nothing to do with whether or not they deserve it. I think we sometimes misunderstand the scripture, that we'll honor your dad if he deserves it, because honor is not really about the recipient more than it is about the giver, because it sets a tone in our life of honor, honoring spiritual authority, honoring human authority. To be in authority, you must learn what it means to be under authority. And that happens naturally in the home. When dad's there, he is the man of the house. Wait till your dad gets home. Dad is the guy. He's the final say. It's everything's okay if dad's home. If there's a noise in the night and dad's in the next room, then it's okay. But if he's not there, then it's not. And I think that's what we have to remember is, especially in this fatherless generation, is that we hang on to honor. And if your dad's not around to honor, then honor the dads that God put into your life. Maybe you have a spiritual father, a pastor, or a teacher, or a coach, or an uncle, or a grandpa, somebody that became your surrogate dad. Honor them. Write them a note, text them this morning, call them if you have an opportunity. Let them know that you love them. And I know you're busy with your own life and raising your own family, but I think if we take the time to honor those men in our lives, it comes back to us, and it teaches our own children, how to walk under authority so that they can too be in authority. As I'm crossing over into my late 50s, and, Rachel and I have raised 5 kids. Our 5th and final is in college. He's a sophomore now. So 4 out of our 5 kids have already finished college, and our 5th is going to graduate in a couple of years. So that was one of our life goals, was we want all of our kids to finish college debt-free, so that they can start their life with at least a head start, because this world is a race, and we wanted to give our kids the best start possible. So 4 out of 5 are there. The 5th is almost there. So they're going to be able to, she and I can be able to say that we gave them the best start that we could. But I built on the legacy that my father gave me. My dad never finished high school, much less went to college, but he always wanted me to go to school. I was the first in my family to go to college. My dad made that possible. He worked hard so that my life could be better than his. And he used to tell me the story about my grandfather. My grandfather was Calvin Norman McAllister. He lived, during the Great Depression. He was born in the 1890s. He was born before men could fly and died right before men made it to the moon. My grandpa Calvin lived in a century of dramatic and mind-blowing change. The speed of change of the 20th century has never been seen before. My granddad lived through it all. But in the height of the Depression, and my grandfather Calvin was a farmer who never went past elementary school. But my dad told me the story. At the height of the Depression, my grandma would get up in the morning and make them breakfast and lunch for school, and they'd have to walk to school. And there were no lunch programs or lunchrooms at school. But Dad said that my grandma, Mandy Richardson McAllister, would take a biscuit from the night before, and if they were fortunate, they'd have bacon or sausage left over. And she would make a sandwich out of it, and then she would wrap it in a dish towel, in a cloth dish towel, and he would put it in his backpack for school, and that would be lunch that day. So all of the great things that my kids and their kids will have, I think about what Calvin and Mandy must have felt like. How they must have lived their life, hoping that their kids could rise up above the Great Depression. Now, the Great Depression is just a story in history. It's a period. We know when it began and when it ended. But when you're living in the middle of it for 15 years, it seems like there's not going to be an end. And it ended probably and only because of the World War II that started. My uncle, my dad's oldest brother, went into the service, and I know he fought in World War II. But that marked the end of the Great Depression. But they didn't really know it was the end until, the war was won, the Nazis were defeated, and the Allied forces conquered the Axis, and all those young boys and girls came home, and I just think about all those 18-year-old boys that went to war in 1941. Man, I remember being 18. I couldn't imagine, landing on Okinawa or storming the beaches of Normandy or parachuting into a hostile territory. I think that's why we call it the greatest generation. But that generation was the greatest because the hard times of the Depression created a strong backbone of American young men and women, who fought and literally saved the world, And I think about Calvin and Mandy, my grandfather, my children's great-grandfather, my grandchildren's great-great-grandfather, and that we're standing on his shoulders today. We're standing on the shoulders of Grandpa Calvin and my dad, Wilson, and, all the men who've gone before us, dating back. So I asked my dad before he died to take me to all the cemeteries where my grandparents were buried, and we did that for a day. He showed me all the grave markers, and so occasionally, about once a year, I'll go back to my dad's parents and my mom's parents just to, pay my respects and remember where we came from. And none of them were perfect, and none of them were, none of them claimed fame or greatness. But they all did great things. The greatest thing that we can do, I think, in the world is to love our spouse and to raise our kids. And I think at the end, that's how, we're going to judge our life. When we are at our last days and we're counting, the highlights of our lives, what's going to always matter more than anything is what we did for our family and the people that we loved along the way. Nothing else really is going to matter. Let me just close it out. I know it's getting late, so I'm going to finish this up today. Somebody told this story a while back, and you probably have already heard it. But our life on the tombstone is signified by the year we were born and the year that we died. And in the middle, there's a dash. And that dash is like a blank line that you get to write your story on. And what kind of story are you writing today? How well you love your wife or your husband, and how well you love your kids, how well you honor your fathers and your grandfathers, and the legacy that you leave. And whatever you do, and whatever your occupation, and whatever God allows you to do in this world, whether you accomplish great things or just average things, whatever your life amounts to, fill that dash with as much life as you can. Do what you can to leave the world a better place than you found it, and that's what my dad did. He raised 5 kids. 3 of us are still alive. 2 have already gone on. My older brother older than me, I was the baby of 5. Therefore, his 4th son died way too young. My oldest sister died last year, and there's 2 other brothers left. But my dad left a great legacy, man. And it goes on in my kids and in my grandkids. And I see that in the eyes of my grandchildren. They'll never know my dad. They'll never get to see his face or hear his voice. But he lives in them. What he did is echoing through the generations. And they may never hear his voice, or they may never feel his touch, or know the sound of his voice. But the DNA of his life flows in all of us, and I think it's a picture of the Heavenly Father's influence in our life, even when we feel at our lowest, even when we feel disconnected and unloved. I want you to remember that He is our Father in heaven. Paul called Him in Romans Abba Father. That was the Greek colloquial saying for daddy. So Paul called Him Daddy, that our Father in heaven is not just a faraway God who can't be touched, but He's a loving Abba. He's ever present, and He will never leave you, and He will never forsake you. Honor Abba in heaven and your Abba on earth. Even your spiritual fathers, honor them. Hey, this is Doug McAllister, and this has been Stories I Didn't Tell Last Sunday. I've had a great time with you today. Hope you've enjoyed the stories. Celebrate your dad or your spiritual fathers every day, and let them know how much you love them, and leave a legacy for your kids and your grandkids and for generations that you may not ever get to meet. A spiritual legacy that will ripple through the ages. From Journey Fellowship Church, I'm Doug McAllister. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time here on Stories I Didn't Tell Last Sunday.